Say it with me, kids. All my comfort characters are fucking miserable. Except him. And him. And here's the thing. There are probably 15 million video essays about Breaking Bad, because Breaking Bad is a show beloved by... hang on, I have this written down here. Everyone. These video essays all say things like, Breaking Bad is considered one of, if not the greatest show in the history of television. They say things like, it revolutionized what a TV show could be. They say things like, Walter White is one of the greatest villains in fiction. And yes, all of that is 100% true. Breaking Bad is a masterwork of television, and I'm so goddamn glad I binged it in the back end of 2022. And I could talk about a million different things, about the amazing way the show handles death, both in the short term and long term, about the amazing transition of a mild-mannered chemistry teacher to a monstrous drug kingpin, about many, many things. But I just want to talk about one guy, this guy, the guy
your boss brought here to show you how it's done.
Because I think that Jesse Pinkman exemplifies one of the major through lines of Breaking Bad. Sometimes, life can really suck. Most times, when you see a character's life go to absolute shit, it is hard to pinpoint the exact decision that led to that moment. It's not always impossible, but hard for most. Not Jesse Pinkman, though. The exact moment that led to the downfall of Jesse Pinkman was right about here.
You wanna cook crystal meth? You and me.
That's right.
The second Jesse signs up with Walter White, which admittedly he did under threat of getting arrested, is the exact moment that his life begins its downward spiral. Matter of fact, Jesse affirms this exact idea a few seasons later.
Ever since I met you, everything I have ever cared about is gone. Ruined, turned to shit, dead ever since I hooked up with the great Heisenberg.
But here's an interesting idea, and I'm gonna need you to stick with me for a second. In God of War Ragnarok, don't worry, this isn't much of a spoiler, just an idea that the game posits, there's an ever-present clash of ideas. The idea that free will and decisions guide our actions, and the idea that the path is laid out before us. Halfway through the game, you're told that your path is the sum total of your own decisions, but that your decisions are set in stone by the immutable nature of your being. And that's a fine perspective on the nature of things, a fine perspective for God of War, but I, and seemingly Vince Gilligan, disagree. I think we're masters of our own fate up to a point, but the decisions of others will always be an aspect of who we are. To use an example from the show, Walter's fate is absolutely a culmination of every action taken throughout the show. But Breaking Bad is also a show that focuses on the consequences of our actions, both intended and unintended. So the death of one leads to the further deaths of hundreds. So we're more than just our decisions, we are the decisions of others as well, which acts as the very hand of fate itself. You can look at almost all the main characters in Breaking Bad through the lens of the balance of decisions and fate. Some are victims of their own bad moves, some are victims of their own bad company, and I think nobody in Breaking Bad is more a victim of fate than Jesse. And more than that, I think he's specifically the greatest victim of Walt. I think when most people watching this heard me say your life is partially determined by the decisions of others, you imagined a parental figure. Because for almost all of us, our parents shape and guide the formative years of our lives. And despite being in his mid-20s, these are very much the formative years of Jesse's life. These are the years when things happened for him, that molded him into the man he was destined to be. Jesse does not have supportive parents. His parents see him as a junkie and a delinquent and really want nothing to do with him. The only real father figure he has is Walter, and that's kind of the worst possible option. Walter is a self-centered egomaniac who abuses and manipulates Jesse. That's the story at almost every possible turn. But Walt does bring out the best and worst in Jesse. He instills in Jesse the qualities any father would want to instill in his son. self-respect, pride in a job well done, those sorts of things. He makes Jesse go from the kid who's told to wear personal protective gear and says this,
Look, you can dress up like a if you want, not me.
to the man confident enough to walk into a poor workstation and say this.
Gives us time to talk about the state of this lab. Don't you have standards? I mean, this place is disgusting. All right, we're gonna scour every vat, every tank, every cooked surface. And then we're gonna clean up every possible source of contamination. And only then, we cook.
But he also brings out aspects that I think many of us would prefer to leave out of our relationships with our fathers. The need for approval, the uncomfortable non-choices you're given, the almost microaggressions and definitely the macroaggressions, the idea that your father's biggest fear might be that you'll turn out just like him. That is, in a lot of ways, Walt's biggest fear for Jesse. They are two very different people from two very different walks of life, but until the moment he became Heisenberg, Walt has felt like a failure. This gets touched on briefly in El Camino in both regards. You see the encouraging nature of Walt's fatherly tendencies, with his suggestion that Jesse goes to college, actually playing to Jesse's strengths by suggesting that he take an interest in business, but also immediately displaying the core of what he envisions for Jesse.
You're really lucky, you know that? You didn't have to wait your whole life to do something special.
And it's this dynamic that largely drives Jesse's life. I think it's interesting to view characters through the lens of looking at their decisions and asking what would happen if they never made them. Or at the very least, if they made the opposite choice. What if Peter Parker stopped that robber? What if John Kramer never attempted suicide? What if Anakin just let Mace kill Palpatine? But the most pivotal moments in Jesse's life are, unfortunately, not his choices to make. What if Walt never wanted to cook meth? What if Tuco didn't beat the shit out of Jesse? What if Walt saved Jane's life? What if Jesse wasn't ultimately forced to be a pawn in Walt and Gus's elaborate game of chess? A game that ultimately got his girlfriend's son poisoned. All of that spiraling into said girlfriend getting shot right in front of him, and Jesse being enslaved for half a fucking year. And that's all thanks to good old Mr. White. Well, really, it's not his decisions and his alone that do that to Jesse. There are other forces at play. Jesse's life is constantly being propelled by the actions of others, launching him and his mental state around like a fucking pinball. Everyone in Breaking Bad suffers for their wrong decisions. Walt dies hated and alone because of his criminal life. Hank dies without even a final word because he couldn't let go of his obsession. But not Jesse. Jesse lives, he gets the happy ending, but he suffers to an impossible degree, and all he ever tried to do was introduce a little white in the morally gray, be the voice of morality in a world of sin. Jesse finds the pearly gates of heaven, but fights through hell to do it, and at the end of the day, it's almost at no fault of his own. Jesse Pinkman gets to be miserable because of a world that beats down on anyone with noble intentions. And I think that's the admittedly very cynical lesson of Jesse Pinkman. Yes, at the end of the day, you should do what's right because it's right and that's the only reason you need. But sometimes, life can be cruel. Life can punish you for those moments of nobility. God, I guess what I'm saying is, sometimes life can be a bitch. Special thanks to my buddy Omar for donating to the $10 tier on my Patreon. If you want to help me cook, not crystal meth, definitely not crystal meth. I'm not going to jail for any of you fuckers. But if you want to help me cook on these videos, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. It really helps me out. You can do it for as little as $3 a month, and you get exclusive benefits.